You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to episode 75 of Making Tracks. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today is a man who would describe his 1 year as co-host of Making Tracks as being in a luxury jail. Mark, how you doing?
I'm very well, but I'm not John Boyega.
You're not John Boyega?
No.
I get you two mixed up all the time, I'm sorry. It's the helmet's on, I just can't tell.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, we're about the same height, so I can understand that. He's a better actor, though, to be fair, so...
I don't know, you fudged your way through this past year well enough, so I think you're doing all right.
Yeah. People may actually believe I'm a Star Wars fan.
That'll never happen.
Nah.
How's your week been? That's the big question we always ask.
Yes, my week has been all right, been kind of busy. This year has kind of started to see more TV productions kind of not start rolling because I'm at the back end of post-production, so getting to me anyway. So I've kind of got a busy few weeks working on some different kind of documentaries and stuff, which is great fun. It's nice to be back in the office kind of like Monday to Friday, which is great. So yeah, and Star Wars wise, I am still chomping my way through Light of the Jedi, and yes, my wallet is a little bit lighter this week, which I'm sure we'll probably get onto in a little bit. How about you? How's your week been in Star Wars?
It's been, real life work's been very busy, which is good. Even though we're in a pandemic, we're supposed to be in lockdown. Obviously, if you're able to work, you do. So as long as you're careful. I went for my COVID test on Friday and passed.
Well done.
So that was a relief. So that was good news. In terms of Star Wars, yeah, you're right. Yeah, Fan First Friday, which we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, that has lightened my wallet as well. I'm still slowly working my way through Light of the Jedi because my plan was, as soon as a High Republic book came out, I would sit down and get through it and read it so I'm up to speed. No, real life has got in the way. There's been other things happening, Fantha related, which has slowed that down, and lots of other stuff. I've started working on the Spanish version of the Star Wars Fact Files now, so that was deadline craziness last week. So I was just every waking minute I was working on that, which was great fun. I'm looking forward to seeing that when it all comes out, and all sorts of insider stuff and all sorts of other stuff. So it's just a big sort of splurge of things all coming together last week. So this week I've got a much easier work week, 2 weeks of much easier work coming up, thank goodness, so I can ease into that, which will be nice. Let's kick off. Let's talk about stuff. Star Warsy stuff.
Yeah.
Season 3 of The Mandalorian. Headline came out announcing that Season 3 will start shooting on April the 5th, 2021, thankfully this year, on the industry site production list. And it basically very quickly says, just now, The Mandalorian Season 3 will begin shooting on April 5th, 2021. No more news than that. What did you think when you saw that headline?
When I saw the headline, at least the headline that Fantha Tracks you'd written, Mandalorian Season 3 to kick off April 5th, I actually thought to myself, oh, well, have they done the production already? And actually, this was when the Season 3 was going to start airing. But I was like, nah, hang on a sec, that's not right. We would have heard more than that. Digging into the article, yeah. Pretty much as it is, as you'd say, really. Starting the 5th of April, so that's good. That's good news. This kind of, I guess, goes again into reinforce the fact that Book of Boba Fett is in production before that, and then Season 3 of Mandalorian is going to air after the Book of Boba Fett, or at least air after the Book of Boba Fett's kind of started airing anyway. So good news. Let's hope and fingers crossed that everybody kind of stays safe and they kind of avoid any kind of COVID kind of delays and stuff. And let's see what Season 3 is going to bring.
Yeah, I mean, on the post, it's funny you say that. I'm looking at that headline now thinking that reads desperately clickbaity because to me,
Yes.
in my head, it meant they're kicking off Season 3. But of course, if you read it like you read it, it reads like it starts on 5th of April, whereas my intention was for it to mean that they start production 5th of April. I might just change that. That it doesn't quite read right.
I am a sucker for clickbait.
Oh, blimey.
And that's the thing. I read the headline, and to be fair, Fantha Tracks I don't think it's ever had a clickbait article. But I read some of these clickbait articles and at least headlines before clicking the link and think to myself, that's got to be clickbait. But I click it anyway, because that's what you do, isn't it? Because you just kind of go, but what if it's not? What if there's some amazing like nugget in this article that nobody else has ever got from this unknown website that nobody's ever heard about, which of course isn't Fanfatracks because everybody's heard of Fanfatracks by now. So, it's not that. But yeah,
you just can't resist a rabbit hole. That's what it is.
Exactly. Can't resist a rabbit hole.
Well, the thing is, I think now that they've got Stagecraft up and running where they want it, and season 2 was a massive improvement technologically on season 1. Clearly, they did the second sort of one-off season, I don't know how you'd call it, of Disney Gallery. So we saw the advancements there. So you can only assume that season 3 again will improve in terms of clarity and tech and scope and size. I mean, the volume itself got bigger, didn't it? The stage got bigger. So now they don't have to go out on location. And, we did see the one episode last year, the Mando Fennec Shand, where Grogu gets taken, that episode, they had to go on location. It was beyond their scope to do that within the volume and using Stagecraft. But hopefully this year, given everything that's going on, this season is what will be. Well, hopefully we'll start to become out of it with the vaccines and such. But this season has been written, and probably with that in mind, that we really do need to make that a consideration that we can't do it any other way. So it'd be interesting to see how that translates onto the screen.
In fact, actually, in that gallery episode for the second season, you do start to see near the end of the production, you could just start to see face masks kind of creeping in on set, don't you? Which is kind of like, it helps to kind of frame stuff from a time perspective. But I have to say, actually, and I think I said this in my written review, but also when we talked about this on Making Tracks, when we reviewed that episode, there was something about how the on-location episode was shot and framed stuff, which it felt like it was on location, like it just felt completely different to I think every other episode, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because I suppose you could say, well, that's what Typhon looks like, but there was a slightly less kind of cinematic feel about it. It felt more like this is all about the visual, kind of like the set pieces and the action, not necessarily the pretty location. That was literally then just the backdrop to then set this kind of kick-ass adventure on.
Yeah, you're right, it did. I mean, it's always good to see them go on location, and obviously the movies have all had to do it to certain degrees, and I think maybe now as technology moves on, that will become less of a thing that they need to do. But yeah, you're right, as cracking an episode as that was the episode we lost the Razor Crest as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think you're right, it did. Watching it, I was thinking, couldn't they have sort of, I don't know, tinted the sky green or done something, I don't know, something just to give it an edge, just to give it a twist. It really did look like they'd just got in their wagons and driven half an hour into the nearest national park and just set up on a cool looking rock and filmed it, which is kind of what they did, which is fine, of course. Not knocking the episode, it was fantastic, but you're right, that one episode compared to some of the stuff we saw, some of the real crazy stuff we saw, I'm going to do it already early on in the show. Compared it to Star Trek, Star Trek well.
Yeah.
They used to do the bottle shows when they'd film it all on the sets they'd already built, so they didn't have to spend any money. That kind of had a bottle show feel, even though it would still, that one episode of Mandalorian probably cost as much as an entire season of Next Generation. But you get my point. It just felt like they were trying to, they've got a finite budget. It doesn't matter if they spend 95% on the first episode and the next 5% on the next, 7. It doesn't matter. They've got a finite budget to spread across, all what they do. But still a great episode, though, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was an amazing episode and gave us that big cliffhanger of Baby Yoda being taken by the Dark Troopers. So, hey,
yes.
So let's see what season 3 kind of brings us. I'm really looking forward to it, and hopefully we won't get too spoiled in the meantime during production.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fanfatracks fan.
So the new year has come and gone, and now at the back end of the first month of the year, we've had our first Hasbro Fan Force Friday for 2021. This was basically the kickoff to, I think, the Lucasfilm and Hasbro kind of launch into the 50th anniversary celebrations, which they covered on a live stream.
I saw bits of it. It was Friday, so this was my mad rush to get my my fact file stuff finished in time to send it all off. But I did sort of keep an eye on it, and the reveals. I mean, some people have been complaining. We'll get into it in a moment. I do get it. I get why they would. But to me, some of this stuff, it's easy for me because I like the packaging as much as I like the figures quite often. So, and some of the packaging here is absolutely gorgeous. But I did see some of the stream. But it was worth it to get some of these figures out the back end. And like you say, 50th anniversary of Lucasfilm. I'm still hoping that Hasbro make a Tucker, a man in his dream with the car. I still want to see the car. So it can't just be Star Wars stuff. They've got to do. We've got Indiana Jones coming, so maybe there's an opportunity to do some indie stuff later on in the year. And I don't know what other licenses Hasbro have that Lucasfilm hold, but fingers crossed there's more than that. It's a big logo they're sticking on stuff. So what did you think of what we saw?
Okay, so if we do a quick rundown, because you've got the lovely kind of turnaround photos of the action figures and stuff on Fantrax, I was a little bit surprised that they kind of kicked off with the episode 1 figures. I was kind of semi-expecting, well, they're going to probably do maybe like a repack or something of the 40th anniversary and New Hope figures, which I'm kind of glad they didn't. And having those couple of, I think they were Celebration exclusives from the other year of Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi at 6-inch scale. I quite liked how they've kind of expanded on that range. So, we've got Qui-Gon Jinn, Mace Windu, and Jar Jar Binks, as well as a battle droid. So I think that kind of, barring really a Queen Amidala figure and maybe like an Anakin and Kitster double pack. I think we're basically covering like the Phantom Menace kind of like vibe. If you've managed to get the Darth Maul and the Obi-Wan Kenobi figures, that is. So
that's a good point.
The Phantom Menace figures look great, and then obviously I think again they've continued their 40th anniversary 6-inch vintage card figures with releasing Greedo, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a Jawa. So I could probably see with that 3 announcements, there's probably a little bit of less kind of like excitement. Jawas and Greedo don't necessarily kind of light my fire when it comes to action figures. The Obi-Wan figure though looks pretty cool because it's got like a photorealistic kind of sculpt head, and so like the head of Alec Guinness looks absolutely standard. But the actual figure's got that slight, it's like in between like a retro figure and a vintage figure. So they've kind of gone down the route of having a vinyl cape.
Yeah, I mean, they say, obviously reading the piece, commemorate the first 50 years of Lucasfilm with figures from the Black Series inspired by the original Star Wars trilogy, featuring classic Kenner figure and packaging design. So with the Greedo, it's like Matt Booker posted something on Fantha a couple of days ago. It's the Greedo figure they released before, but they've painted him in the colours that we got our original little Greedo back in 78. And obviously replicated the packaging as closely as they can as well. I've ordered the Greedo. I think it just looks fantastic, and head to all the cool stuff if you want to get all these things. Most of them are there, if not all. The Kenobi, again, they've done it in that sort of original style, and the Jawa, it looks so much like the one we got back in the day. I do like these. This little set, this little subset, you picked up on how it feels like a continuation of the 40th anniversary, and it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But this is the one I think people have grumbled about the most. It's a redeco, and it's just the same figure painted again. Yeah, it is. But to me, as somebody who got these figures, back in the day when I was a kid, there's no way I wasn't getting Greedo. I mean, Greedo was the figure I wanted first and couldn't find, and my first figure ended up being a Death Star droid. So, but here we have a repainted Greedo, which I think looks really cool. I think that looks ace, and with the packaging and everything about it, totally. And Ben, that's as familiar a card front as you're ever going to find, isn't it? And the Jawa. So I think these are really, really nice. Really do like those. Yeah.
So have you pre-ordered all of these, or are you picking and choosing?
I'm picking and choosing. I always do. I mean, although saying that, you mentioned, the Phantom Menace figures. If they did, if they ever did a Phantom 50th anniversary wave, I'm kind of a bit soppy for Phantom, and increasingly so as the years go on. So I think if they did a wave of Phantom 3 3/4 inch figures, I might be tempted by them. Not that that's anything that they're looking to do, I don't think, but I always pick and choose. I mean, as we move on, the final Black Series figure is the 6-inch Elite Squad Trooper figure from the upcoming Bad Batch series. That looks really nice. So, and I love the new box packaging they've got on the sort of your mainline Black Series figures. So I might be tempted by that. And then, as you say, we dive into the vintage collection, kicking off with Darth Maul.
Yeah, kicking off with Darth Maul with so that's Clone Wars era Darth Maul, because he's kind of got the robotic legs and he looks quite nice and posable. I mean, I've pre-ordered him, and the next figure they released, which is the Ahsoka figure. Again, that's kind of Clone Wars, isn't it? That's kind of Season 5 or season 6 of kind of Clone Wars, really. The wave at the moment is Darth Maul and Ahsoka for, I think it's wave 33, I think it is, but 2 unannounced figures, so which are coming later on, I think.
Yeah, and they move into, I mean, you mentioned obviously the 50th anniversary Black Series. They're doing 50th anniversary vintage collection as well. So we've got Paplu, which looks awesome, which was always a cool figure back in the day. Further in the vintage collection, Princess Leia in her Endor outfit, a poncho, as we used to think of it. Yeah. Very nice. They've just dropped that 50th anniversary logo just in the top left-hand corner. It's just nice and subtle. So that looks gorgeous. And finally, to wrap it up, the AT-ST driver with the removable helmet, which I think looks really cool. But I can't make out, is that Robert Watts or is that Richard Marquand? I can't make it out.
That, to me, looks like Richard Marquand. To me,
there you go.
Or at least there's a bit more subtle hint, I think, to Richard.
We need a Lieutenant Watts now. We need a Fantha Tracks exclusive Lieutenant Watts 3 3/4 vintage collection at AT-ST driver from Return of the Jedi. That's what we need. With the Fantha Tracks logo in the top right-hand corner. That's what we need.
Exactly. Why not? Yeah, so it's a solid start, I think, to the year.
Yeah.
The Black Series 50th anniversary figures seem to be Amazon exclusives, so you should be able to kind of pre-order those. Yeah. And they're coming out, I think, one a month from April, I think. So they say spring 21. And then the Clone Wars figures are kind of, they say summer 21. So that's kind of, again, like June, July, kind of August kind of time. So there's a smattering of new figures being released throughout, like, the second and third quarter. So it's a good start.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
To raise awareness and funds for Stand Up to Cancer, the Great British Celebrity Bake Off is returning, and it's bringing with it some really cool guests and chefs, if you want to call them that. James McAvoy, Dame Kelly Holmes, the athlete, John Bishop, who's just turned up in Doctor Who, TV host Stacey Dooley, Tom Allen, David Baddiel, Jade from Little Mix. There's a whole bunch of people, some really interesting folks. Rob Beckett is always great fun. Annika Rice, who I used to watch with great interest when I was a younger man. Rhys Shearsmith from the League of Gentlemen, and Catherine Ryan, the comedian. But the one that will interest Star Wars listeners the most, I would imagine, is Daisy Ridley, who will be trying to not make soggy bottoms on the Great Celebrity Bake Off, cooking 3/4 portions for everybody. What did you think when they announced that it was Daisy?
That would be cool. I have no idea whether or not she's going to be, if she's any good as a chef. Be fun to watch, I suppose, and it's always a good watch Bake Off. And for a good cause, Stand Up to Cancer, you can't really kind of get much kind of more important in these days than that, I don't think. So yeah, I'll be interested to see what she's going to bake though.
I always think this, when they bring celebrities on, and Master Chef, the celebrities and the professionals and all that sort of stuff. You watch the professionals, and it's art, isn't it? It's not cooking. It's art. It's chemistry and alchemy, and it's actually way more interesting than it appears on the face of it, and it just makes me hungry at the wrong time of night. But with the celebrity ones, they could just as easily come and do the most incredible Indian buffet as do a plate of beans on toast with Worcester sauce.
Yeah.
You just don't know what you're going to get. So I have no idea whether Daisy will be a fantastic chef. The only knowledge I have of her and food is making that little bread thing in The Force Awakens. So I don't know. But I think it'll be fun having her on, because we know what a sparky, interesting character she is, and she should mix well with the others.
I think so, yeah, especially with Rob and John Bishop. I think they could probably have some banter, I think, there. So it'll be great, because we haven't actually seen Daisy at all really on TV for a while. So, and yeah, like you said, there is that kind of notion, isn't there? Even with Celebrity MasterChef, it's a little bit more serious and a little bit more buttoned down, and everybody puts in there kind of like really thinks about it. Whereas Bake Off can be a little bit more like it's boom and bust, really, isn't it? It's like the cakes either work or they don't, and then that's it. So we could be in for a really interesting and enjoyable watch. So when's that out, actually?
It's all they've said is in the spring, and they've not mentioned, unless I missed it, which I don't think I did, they've not mentioned how many episodes they're doing. I think from memory last time, I think it was on for a week, so I think it will be a few episodes. But what a nice thing to do, to get to be in a tent in a lovely English country garden, basically, cooking whatever they're asked to cook. And I don't know whether they'll get moved on and they come to a winner and they come to the last three and they pick a winner. I don't know whether that's what they're doing, or more likely it's purely for the comic value, because we have got a lot of comedians in here. John Bishop, Tom Allen, David Baddiel, Rob Beckett. There's plenty. Rhys Shearsmith, who's a funny guy from League of Gentlemen. There's plenty of funny people and interesting people. Ade Adepitan as well, the Paralympian. So there's a really good bunch of characters in there. And we know Daisy's funny because we've seen her in all the behind the scenes stuff. So that should be a lot of fun. Get your munchies ready to watch the Great British Celebrity Bake Off for Stand Up to Cancer.
Hello, Fantha Tracks. Fantha Tracks. I screwed it up. Hi, Fantha Tracks.
So moving on, John Boyega, ex-First Stormtrooper and potential Jedi in the making, sat down with Cinema Blend recently, where he discusses his latest role in the Steve McQueen film Small Axe, Red, White and Blue. The film's about a black policeman who joins the London force to try and change racial biasness in the institution. Obviously, this is quite a far cry from John's role as Finn in a galaxy far, far away. Mark, you posted the most notable quote from the original article on the site, where John refers to working on a big franchise such as Star Wars as a luxury jail, which I don't think sounds quite as negative as possibly the headline on Cinema Blend would lead you to believe.
I certainly don't feel sorry for him because, and I don't think he's intending people to feel sorry for him. I think he's talking it read to me like he's talking purely from an actor's point of view. So, and also for him, he'd done a few other roles, obviously before Force Awakens, most predominantly Attack the Block, which was brilliant. And so he'd done different things, but it's still early days in his career, still early 20s when he got the role of Finn. Much like Daisy, it's like her first big gig. So you do that at the right age of your career. You get the biggest franchise you can really be in is Star Wars. In terms of longevity, in terms of you could be in a Star Wars film and still be doing conventions in 20 years' time off the 3 weeks you did on a Star Wars film 20 years ago type scenario. That's just how it is. That really is how it is. And we've spoke to a lot of people over the years who are like, I don't really remember. I was only on Empire Strikes Back for 2 weeks and I'm still talking about it 40 years later, sort of thing. Yeah. So because of the interest, whereas you could argue a Marvel franchise is a bigger franchise right now than Star Wars. It is in most measurable ways, but it isn't in merchandise, which means your face isn't on the shelves. There's always new Marvel stuff coming out, so there's new people to concentrate on. Marvel don't do conventions like Star Wars has done conventions for decades, so you couldn't sustain in the same way. And also Marvel tend to pick bigger stars, people who are known already, coming into it. So and Star Wars has started doing it as well. But going back to John, being in a big franchise, it's kind of like luxury jail for an actor when you want to do something else. So he played Finn over 3 movies, filmed over, 5 years, and probably didn't get time to do much else because they're intense films to shoot. He's working out to get into shape and all the other things he's doing. So I don't suppose he did much else. He did was it Wojciech, the play? I know Matt went to see it in London around the sort of Force Awakens time. I don't think he had time to do much else. So as an actor who's now getting a lot of work and getting a lot of attention, and he's one of those guys you think he's got a really interesting career ahead of him. I look at John, Daisy and Oscar in a similar sort of way, weirdly, to the 3 kids who played Harry Potter. This is going to sound like a weird analogy, but stick with me, because Daniel Radcliffe, I think, has always done interesting stuff, and he's an interesting guy to watch, and he's an interesting actor, and he's a nice guy, and you wish him well, and you think he's going to have a nice, steady career. And you look at Emma Watson, goes on, does Beauty and the Beast, massive film, and she's done all these other little bits and bobs, and she's going to have an interesting career. And then there's Rupert Grint, and I always remember Martin Scorsese saying of the 3 actors, the one he thought was going to be the one that would go on and do great things was Rupert Grint, right?
Yeah.
Trained as a kid actor and all the charisma in the world. And he, now this is the comparison, I think that John is the Rupert Grint of the group, because I think John will be the one that actually, Rupert Grint bought an ice cream van and doesn't really work that much and doesn't seem that bothered because he's sitting on millions and he seems quite happy. But Boyega, I think, will be the Grint of the group in relation to what Scorsese said. He'll be the one that goes off and does really interesting roles, and he could be the Oscar winner of the group. Not that Oscar Isaac's not got Oscars ahead of him, you know what I mean? Or he's that kind of actor. But I can see him doing really interesting stuff. And I think just playing Finn, and we know there were slight frustrations with the role as well, but I don't think there's any ungratefulness in that comment or dissatisfaction in that comment. I think it really is like the Chris Evans thing. He's Captain America for 10 years and a phenomenal Captain America, and I hope he comes back at some point, which I'm sure he will. But he needed to get out of that and do other stuff. He's doing documentaries and he's doing other stuff on Apple TV, and and he's still only 40, so he's got years of he can still do action roles for another 10, 15 years if he wants to. It's all there for him. That's what I think Boyega is getting at. And like I say, Luxury Jail, you've got your own camper, you've got your own route, you've got people running around after you and opening doors for you at premieres and all the attendant stuff that goes with it. It's constricting as an actor, but in every other way, it must be fantastic.
Yeah, I guess so. But I suppose also there probably is a little bit beyond just the, like you said, the kind of restriction on the acting side of things. Especially with Star Wars, we saw just like what a media blackout it was.
Yeah.
And so, when they're probably in production as well, they must be kind of like, they're only kind of going from their house probably to set and back, and they're probably worried about, who they talk to and, what accidental kind of bits of spoilers they could slip out, even to close friends and family and stuff. So it's probably also not only just the kind of the schedule that means that they're not allowed to do much, but also you kind of think those kind of fairly heavy NDAs that they have to sign for Disney and Lucasfilm could probably may weigh slightly on their minds as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll tell you one thing though. I thought it was interesting, your opening paragraph to this article on Fan for Tracks, and it says John Boyega flexing his muscles in his first post Star Wars era of his career.
Yeah.
So what did you mean by that? Do you think he's going to be back?
Yeah, I do, and that's not a dig. That's just me subtly putting my POV into a news article on a news site. If you look back at Mark Hamill, for example, and we were writing this about Mark, not John, but about Mark in 1984, not 2021. And we were saying Mark's said how, hard work it was being in a franchise and didn't get time to do anything else. And now he's about to go on to Broadway in Amadeus so he can flex his acting muscles and go off and do other stuff, which he did to great effect. And obviously the voice work and all the other things he did. And he was a pop culture icon without ever coming back in The Force Awakens. But he did come back in The Force Awakens. And so now you look at Mark now, post The Mandalorian. Will he come back again? Will he not? I don't know. But you could argue that at numerous points, after The Rise of Skywalker, it was his post-Star Wars era. And then after The Mandalorian, The Rescue, it was a post-Star Wars era. Point being, these guys do come back. I think in time, as the Star Wars story moves into other eras and we get other series and it all builds and builds and builds as it is, at some point, 20 years down the line, like Ewan's just coming back and Hayden's just coming back, I think John, Daisy, and hopefully Oscar, I don't know, but, maybe, those characters could come back. Those actors could come back. I mentioned the Potter kids. I think they'll come back at some point. I don't think it's that far away, to be fair. So it's an observation rather than any kind of big statement. But I think he is in the first post-Star Wars era of his career. For an actor of his age, well, he's 27, 28, it's really important now. He sets his stall out, the sort of work that he wants to do. So small acts, which was brilliant, and he was brilliant in it. Working with an Oscar-winning director like Steve McQueen, that's a statement. Now he's doing a film with Robert De Niro. That's another big, so he's getting good work. He's done stuff for Netflix, so that's a whole world of opportunities. So it's all laid out for him now. That's what that means. So I think in time John will be back. I think it's a long way off, but like I say, he's only in his late 20s. If he turns up as Finn in his late 40s, he's still going to have plenty of gas in the tank and probably a lot more clout. You think over the next 20 years, he could be walking back into Star Wars with an Oscar or anything for all we know. We just don't know what's ahead for him. But because he's not knocking franchise movie making here, if Pacific Rim 2 had been a massive hit, he'd have made Pacific Rim 3, and then he's in another franchise. And this happens to a lot of actors. Back in the day, it wasn't thought of in those terms. Harrison Ford being in Star Wars and then being in Blade Runner and then being in Indiana Jones and then being Jack Ryan in those movies. They weren't thought of as franchises in quite the same way. The only franchise that anybody ever really thought of back then was Star Trek. That was known as the franchise. So now we've got multiple franchises because now we're always fishing back to the 80s to pick stuff and run with it. I think Boyega's been quite smart here. He's putting a little bit of distance between what he's done before and what he's doing ahead. But now, when you get actors who'll turn up in big movies and do dramas and then turn up on television, I think it's a smart bit of business he's doing here.
for everything in one location. Daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds. Bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So checking our inbox, it sounds like we have a listener question.
It's a letter from, a listener's question, from Cole Bliss. With future Disney Plus Star Wars series, do you think they'll stick with separate episode releases like The Mandalorian, The Clone Wars, or move to binge culture of dropping all the episodes at once? And what do you think the pros and cons of that are? So, Mark, do you prefer, or do you... What are your thoughts? Do you think putting an episode a week out like One Division are doing at the moment is the way to go forward, or like Mando did? Or do you think just, feels to me a bit more old school now, weirdly, just drop the whole lot at once and let people watch it in a day if they want to do it? What's your preference?
In my mind, I think that it totally depends, really, because I think one thing that worked really well with Mandalorian, and it's something that we don't necessarily get with other shows that do get dropped on us in one go, is that you have the social viewing aspect. You have the space between an episode to review it, to speculate about it, to talk amongst your friends. Whereas, of course, when Stranger Things kind of dropped, and I think that was definitely one of the shows that I think a lot of people did it became a bragging right of like, I've watched all of them in one go, in 8 hours or something. And it's kind of like, well, that's great. But now what are you going to watch? Because you've been waiting for the last 6 months or however long for this series, and now you just kind of splurged them all. It kind of happened with Cobra Kai, actually.
Yeah, I was just thinking Cobra Kai. Yeah.
At the beginning of this year, it dropped on New Year's Day, and they're so easy to watch, and it's such an enjoyable watch that, okay, fine, watch 2 or 3 or 4 a day, but like a lot of people watched them watched the whole series in a day, and then that's it for a whole year.
Yeah.
And so the problem I find sometimes with binge watching is actually I enjoy it. I don't absorb the story and the characters as much as I do when it's slightly spread out over a week or a couple of weeks or something. And so I think the anticipation aspect for looking forward to shows is kind of coming back. And I think Disney are quite savvy and clever in doing that, because I think Amazon tend to drop a whole series, and then so does obviously Netflix tends to just drop everything all at once, and so actually kind of going back to almost like a linear kind of TV aspect of like, we know Fridays are going to drop a Marvel or a Mandalorian. It's quite nice. You've got something to look forward to, and so I'm not kind of like, I don't find it frustrating. If we take One Division into consideration and compare it to Mandalorian, for instance, some episodes of The Mandalorian, the shorter ones, I was kind of like, just feel like I was just getting into it. The ones which are kind of like 30 minutes, and then they finish, and then you're like, oh. And then you kind of go, oh, I wish there was another episode. And it's a bit like that with One Division, where I think they're quite savvy in the fact that they dropped the first 2 episodes to kind of get people kind of into this slightly odd, weird kind of like world in 1 week, and then it's gone into like a single episode per week. But like the episode just gone, so episode 4, I was completely in it, and I was expecting it to be like an hour long. And so when it finished after like half an hour, so I was like, oh, that feels a bit kind of short. But it left me wanting more. It left me wanting to see the next episode, which really at the end of the day, if that's kind of what you want. I don't know if it's my old age, but when I binge watch something, like I said, I struggle then if it's a whole year for new series to get released. I forget kind of what's going on in that time, and then you have to either rewatch some of the episodes or sometimes even I just kind of like lose interest. I do, however, personally for myself, if it's something that's been out, like for instance at the moment me and the girlfriend we're seriously heavily binge watching Chicago PD and Chicago Fire, and they're like 8 seasons long of about 24 episodes per season, so that's a lot of TV time, and we're binge watching that. And actually with Chicago PD, we've now caught up to the to where they are with the US releases, and so now we're kind of, having been able to watch 3 or 4 episodes a day or something, we're now actually having to wait for a weekly episode to come out. So it's a bit frustrating after you get used to it. But you don't, I like I said, I don't think you appreciate it so much. You just consume it, and it becomes so disposable that you just kind of move on to something else. It's like, okay, we've watched that. Now what are we going to watch? You don't, at least for me anyway, I don't kind of sit there and kind of go, we watched that. That was amazing. Let's talk about it. We're just going to move on to something else. So yeah, I don't know. I'm quite happy with Disney doing a weekly kind of release. For me anyway, that feels fine. I think it works fine because with The Mandalorian, you've only got 8 episodes a season, right? Yeah. So that is not a huge amount of story time. So we know that every kind of story beat and every kind of episode is going to be thought out and is basically going to be made to the best of and the highest ability they can make it, so that actually it drives the story along and gets people wanting to watch the next episode. The benefits is, like, obviously you then don't kind of have some of these filler episodes which kind of go off on a sidetrack, but then sometimes I'd also, on this shorter like series, you then miss the opportunities to have these kind of like one-offs. And I know me and you have spoken a lot about like Deep Space Nine and how Deep Space Nine having 26 episodes per season allowed them to kind of have, the crazy episodes where like Little Green Men, when like, Quark and Matt go back in time to Roswell and they play baseball for a whole episode and stuff like that, which is actually really nice character moments, which you kind of can do with Star Trek because it's more kind of about the actual granular kind of character beats, whereas obviously Star Wars is bigger movements and bigger soap opera kind of events, so therefore that wouldn't necessarily work. But at the same time, you don't feel like you're then robbed if there is a kind of quote-unquote filler episode and you've kind of not really had any kind of like movement on the story between one week and the next. So for me personally, I'm quite fine with doing weekly releases. I think probably Disney will continue with that all the time, but actually they are seeming to be working and seeming to keep the audience engaged, because I suppose week 1 to week 2 to week 3, that's 3 weeks where you've got people talking about Disney Plus episodes and series. Whereas if you drop it all in one day, you move on to something else in a couple of days and that's it. And then you maybe forget about Disney Plus because you're now talking about the next Marvel series. So there's pros and cons to each. What's your preference? What do you prefer?
I think similar to you. I think it depends on the show. We talked about WandaVision before we started recording and both very much enjoying it. And I think we both agreed that episodes 1 and 2 needed to be watched together. A lot of people aren't kind of getting WandaVision yet, and I think episode 4, which came out this week, was such a sea change in the show that made the first 3 episodes, put them in a completely different light. I think if you binged it, you wouldn't have the time to sort of think about it. And Cobra Kai is the great example. I mean, Cobra Kai is half an hour long. It really is that 80s style, in the nicest sense, sort of disposable. You can. We watched the whole season 3 in 2 days. We watched 8 episodes one day and the last 2 the next morning and loved it. And I probably won't think about Cobra Kai again until January next year when season 4 comes on. With The Mandalorian, for example, I'd gone online saying, well, I think Mando, there's so much, and there's a bigger picture with Mandalorian, and it will be the same with all of them up to a point. And this feeds into the Marvel thing. With Mando at the moment, I think you could put an episode of Mando out every month because you've got Star Wars.com doing stuff, you've got Insider doing stuff, you've got Hasbro and other toy licensees doing Mando Mondays, releasing products. The fandom is so huge, we could comfortably spend a month talking about that episode of The Mandalorian and all the podcasts and what we do on Fantha and all the other things. When conventions get up and running, guests start turning up, you could really make it feel, even though it's only between 35 and 45 minutes generally, feel like a movie's dropped every month. It's a big enough, substantial enough project that you could do that. I think if you put all of Mandalorian on in one hit, yes, you could sit and binge watch it and catch up. And if Mando's been out for a year and you've not seen season 1 and you want to watch season 2, then binge it. That's no problem because you don't need to interact with anybody else to do that. And I found that with Cobra Kai in that we came to season 3, having already watched the first 2 seasons and the end of season 2, and we were watching it go, these are only half an hour long. A whole of a season's like 5 hours, if that. We really should have watched them again to refresh ourselves. I know that it will be the same with Stranger Things when we eventually get to it. And we always binge Stranger Things because we love it so much. And it's all people are talking about for that week. But you imagine how many episodes a season of Stranger Things? 10 or 11, something like that. It's about that, isn't it? 10, I think. You stretch that out over 2.5 months. And Stranger Things is like the most streamed. I think it's the king of streaming, isn't it? It's the show that's always had the most attention. I don't know. With Marvel, I know they want to get to a point where, and I think that's what they're aiming for. You'll have the final episode of WandaVision. They'll probably show a great big extended trailer for Winter Soldier, Falcon and Winter Soldier, and then that'll start the following week, I think. So we are going to be running season to season with Marvel. You'll have a Marvel show, a Marvel episode every week. And I think that's where ultimately you'll get with Star Wars. Your season of Book of Boba Fett will finish next week, The Mandalorian, season 3, and then season 3 of Mando, and then next week, season 2 of The Bad Batch. When that finishes, what I'm getting at. So it'll just constantly, you'll have Star Wars every week, you'll have Marvel every week. Binge watching works for bringing old shows in. The new Star tile on Disney Plus is going to chuck in, like, I don't know what it was, 270 movies.
NCIS and stuff like that.
Yeah, goodness knows how many shows. Yeah, chuck them all on at once. There's no point in putting an episode of Modern Family on every week to Disney Plus. It's 10 years worth of episodes, and, what's the point? Stick them all on at once. They did it with The Simpsons. 31 seasons of The Simpsons just turned up. But for what Cole's talking about here, I think weekly is perfect, especially for Star Wars, because whatever turns up on screen, we can go off. I know it's a fairly toxic environment, but we can go off as Star Wars fans. Well, screw social media. You and me as fans can talk about it on here and hypothesize to our heart's content and not argue about it and just have different opinions like we used to on social media before it all got weird, and just chew over the possibilities. And then next week, sometimes I'll be right and sometimes you'll be right, but we'll both be happy because it's Star Wars and it's generally made really well. That's what I think they should do, and just engender that culture, if you like, of a weekly episode. And the Star Wars show. I miss the Star Wars show. I think Lucasfilm could do more to go over these things, and the stuff on the site does. And you could really make a big deal about this week's episode of Mandalorian. Dengar turned up, and then Hasbro released a new Dengar figure. And I know this is the goal. This is what they all want to do. They want that synergy.
Yeah,
and there's so many moving parts, isn't there? There's so many moving parts. And we're in a pandemic still, which people seem to be forgetting, but we are. So that's thrown everything out. Shook everything up. But long answer to a very succinct and good question, I would say, I prefer weekly. I like binging selfishly, but you don't get time to chew it over and think about it.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
I mean, I know there's a portion of Star Wars fandom that kind of says, we don't want Star Wars to become like, so available that it stops being an event. And actually, I think in one way to address that balance is, you have to accept in this day and age now with Disney owning Lucasfilm that Star Wars is going to be on the TV. And personally, I think that's for the better. But that doesn't mean it doesn't need to be an event. And one way you do it is, like you say, you have it on a weekly schedule. And you actually bring up a good point, actually, because one thing that I really loved about the Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels was you had on Stars.com, you had like Rebels Recon. And, they were they had nice quirky little things. You'd spend 2 minutes talking to Pablo Hidalgo, who would kind of give you some kind of sarky answer to some kind of questions and stuff. But but there was also meat and potato stuff where you'd actually sit down with Dave, and Dave would kind of break down, like some of the Easter eggs and some of the deeper meanings behind the show, which was great. Now, obviously, we know Dave's moved on and is probably far too busy to do that on a weekly basis. But I think the Mandalorian and Mandalorian, seasons and stuff like that they could quite easily have done something like that. I mean, I think maybe you could say, well, potentially the gallery was a slight answer to that, but then I don't think we're going to get the gallery for the Bad Batch, and I don't think we're necessarily going to get more than one feature-length episode of the gallery for the Mandalorian Season 3, and maybe even the Book of Boba Fett. The gallery kind of serves a nice kind of like touchstone to allow people who don't necessarily know Star Wars as intimately as we do to kind of learn more about, some of the inspiration behind Star Wars. So, so that's good. But I think generally, it's quite, it's a balance, isn't it? And I think Disney will be quite savvy and will kind of go with the flow. And there may be series that do all drop in one go, or maybe drop 2 or 3 episodes a week, which again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I suppose it depends upon the length of the series and how long we're going to run for. If you've only got 12 episodes, that is then only 12 weeks worth of new content that you can put out. With The Mandalorian, it is only 8 8 episodes a season. So therefore, you would be a bit crazy to do more than 1 or 2 episodes a week, because that then condenses all your new kind of like shelf life down to like a month. So it swings and roundabouts, really, isn't it? If we look at Star Trek, and I think Star Trek's an interesting model because Discovery, that comes out weekly. Yeah. But that was, I think, that felt a little bit too long. And by the end of season 3 of Discovery, I kind of lost interest quite a bit. And that's not necessarily blamed on the scheduling. That's obviously partly going to be down to, unfortunately, the storylines hasn't quite landed with me and stuff like that. But it's kind of like there is that risk, and especially if you have a longer run show, the longer the story goes on for, the harder you have to work to keep everybody engaged week in and week out.
Yeah, that's true. And Star Trek's a good comparison. But as always, I know we talk about Trek way too much on this show, and that's completely on me. But I think Discovery's a great example. I think Discovery is a 10-episode season would be perfect, because the way Star Trek is, and there's a point to this, the way Star Trek is made now compared to how it was made when they were doing 24, 26 episodes a season is completely different. Star Trek as a concept, as a show, as the way it's presented and everything, I'm not on about technically, just the type of show that it is completely different. If we could have had the tech now back on Next Gen and DS9, hog heaven, you'd probably never watch anything else. The style of show, I think 10 episodes of Discovery is enough for me per year. I could happily watch 26 episodes of Next Generation because it was a different style of making a show. Nothing to do with the characters or anything else. Just the way it's presented. It's just different. And Discovery is a very different beast to anything that's gone before. So that's that. I think with Star Wars, it's the same. If you had 20 episodes of The Mandalorian, we'd probably go, yeah, take that every day. But I think having that 8 episodes is just nice. It leaves us hungry for more. It's all up on the screen. You know, this season we've had all the rumours that came before season 2 of, Boba Fett's in it and Ahsoka's in it and la 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 la, and Thrawn gets mentioned and all these things. You looked at it on paper and went, fan fiction. And then you see it on the screen and it's like, holy whatever. That was just so well made. And it's teed us up for another series, Book of Boba Fett. So that they're doing exactly what you mentioned a couple of minutes ago. They're making it an event. If there's too much of it, it's not an event anymore. It's like, it's Friday, Star Wars today. You don't want to be like that about Star Wars. It's like, right, I'm up early on Friday morning, make me a cup of tea, boot up Disney Plus, get on the sofa and start playing at 8 o'clock. You know, it's an event. That's why Marvel are doing it so well with their first show with WandaVision. It's become an event. You know, like I said earlier, like we talked about, you know, some people are getting it, some people aren't. I think by episode 5 and going on, people are going to be, I need to go back and watch those first 3, don't I? Yeah, you do. You know, and the reason it's going to work is, okay, they can binge and catch up because, you know, I think going forward, those first 3 episodes will explain a lot, but we're on a linear path now moving forward through the story, aren't we? So, I think with Star Wars, you want that time to talk about it. You know, like was it The Talking Dead? You know, they used to chat about that show about, you know, and Trek did one as well. Lots of shows have done it, and it works. You know, it's good that you can have a show like that, have a few celebrity guests on and talk about it, have a few fans on and talk about it, and make it an interesting show. Just engenders conversation and gets people talking about it, and that weekly style just seems to work so well, I think, for Star Wars and for Marvel, and at the moment for Trek as well.
So that was a fantastic listener's question there by Carl, so thank you for sending that in. And Mark, if people want to send us a question, how can they get in touch?
They can, if they want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, they can visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on their mobile devices. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. And news bag is dry now, so we need more questions. Thank you, Cole, for that wonderful one. But please send in more, so keep them coming. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Now, Good Morning Tatooine, you'll notice it hasn't been on in January. There is a reason. Illustrious leader of all things Good Morning Tatooine, Brian Cameron, has been more than a bit under the weather. He's on the mend. The show will be back, and it will be on Sunday nights, 9 o'clock UK time, and then later on Fanthatracks TV on the YouTube and later on the site, but not quite yet. So we'll make an announcement on the site about when it's back, but it will be coming back. And I think we've talked about a lot of stuff in this episode and done it without making too many flubs.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all right. So, and if not, I'm editing the show. So, yes, we'll see how badly it gets bolted together. But yeah, just a quick note to say, yeah, get well, Brian. Hope he's kind of on the mend and all that. And yeah, he'll be back rabbiting away soon, I hope. So I think that's all we've got time for this week. Yeah, so Mark, thanks for hopping on again as always.
I'm loving all the rabbit jokes, you know, rabbit holes, rabbiting on, hopping on. It's just very, very funny.
Leaving that there.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.